Welcome to the Chilling Ghost Stories channel. Today we bring you a famous Chinese ghost story titled The Moonlight Mystery. If you enjoy the story, please give us a like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you. Now let's get started.
Chapter 22. 3 p.m., June 7th. Since Wāng Lán Shān was transferred to the intensive care unit, Yè Xīn could only see her in the flower garden. During those times, Xùn often sat beside Yè Xīn, and her heart and gaze were entirely focused on him, so she didn't say much to Wāng Lán Shān. But she still remembered how, every time, Wāng Lán Shān's eyes would look at her with pity, helplessness, and sadness. Now, as she recalled, even though she was sitting under the warm sunlight, Yè Xīn still felt goosebumps. The look in her eyes matched a statement Wāng Lán Shān had once said: "What is invading your heart is not a name, but a tragedy." It was indeed accurate. The so-called love she had was nothing more than a true illusion, and she had sunk too deep into it, striving in vain, making excuses not to abandon that beautiful but illusory thing. This was not the right choice for Yè Xīn. Sure enough, Yè Xīn saw Wāng Lán Shān in the flower garden. As usual, she was sitting on a rattan chair, holding a sketchbook and a pen, but perhaps the warm sunlight had lulled her to sleep, as Wāng Lán Shān appeared to be dozing off with her head tilted. Yè Xīn approached, crouched beside her, looked up at her, and choked out, "Please help me." Wāng Lán Shān opened her eyes, her gaze filled with compassion, but her voice was cold. "You don't want to believe, and I have no ability to persuade you. Doing more useless things will only shorten your life. You said you saw him in my heart, but when I asked the nurses and patients, none of them could see him. Tell me, what kind of person is he? Who is he? You call him Xùn. But now I know, maybe it's not him. Please tell me who he really is. This is the only thing that can help me." Wāng Lán Shān lowered her body and looked at Yè Xīn. Seeing her face drenched in tears, the old woman's eyes also blurred. Wāng Lán Shān suddenly lifted the drawing, quickly continuing to sketch. It was unclear how much time passed, but Yè Xīn saw Wāng Lán Shān's hand, which had been steady with the pen, suddenly tremble. Worried, Yè Xīn asked, "Are you okay?" Wāng Lán Shān seemed to be having difficulty breathing. Almost done. Unable to hold back, Yè Xīn turned and looked at the drawing. She saw a young man smiling, dressed in a white robe. This was the Xùn she had been longing for day and night. Wāng Lán Shān's hand became more fluid, adjusting the final details, then moved the pen to the young man's left hand. She carefully refined the lines. It was clear that there were two faint bite marks on the back of his hand. When Xùn first appeared in the flower garden, Yè Xīn had pressed her longing and intense emotions into a gentle bite on his hand, but it hadn't broken the skin. If it had been a normal hand, the mark would have disappeared within seconds, but why did the marks on Xùn's hand remain, and why did Wāng Lán Shān notice them so clearly? Yè Xīn had thought that Xùn's appearance would ease her longing and bring her happiness. But little did she know, it was just like a beautiful flower in the mirror, or the reflection of the moon in the water. Why did Wāng Lán Shān's hand tremble, but she kept on drawing? She wasn't drawing Xùn anymore. She was drawing another face in a different part of the picture. Yè Xīn stared in shock, then slowly made out a handsome face, thick eyebrows, large sharp eyes, but with a dark circle under them. This was the student with the cold expression. Could he also be in my heart? Wāng Lán Shān suddenly let out an "oh." The drawing and pencil fell to the ground. She sat motionless in the rattan chair, her hands limply hanging, her graying hair disheveled, her head tilted back, and foam bubbling from her mouth. Back in the patient's room, Yè Xīn was still reeling from what had just happened to Wāng Lán Shān. What had happened to her? After Yè Xīn called for help, the doctors and nurses came running, and they said it was a sudden stroke, which was a rare occurrence in elderly patients like Wāng Lán Shān. But even if it was a stroke, it happened at a very suspicious time. Wāng Lán Shān had proven the existence of Ta Xuan in Yè Xīn's heart, but the appearance of him was very different from the real Ta Xuan. Both she and Wāng Lán Shān had seen him, even the cold young man, and that meant the so-called illusion didn't really exist. Perhaps only patients like her and Wāng Lán Shān could see it. This explanation, no matter how dramatic, still showed that her mind was very clear. What was needed now was someone who believed in her. If even Wāng Shān didn't believe her, then she feared no one in the world would. 9 a.m., June 8, Shān, I've thought about it carefully, and you weren't wrong at all, Yè Xīn said calmly when Wāng Shān came to visit her. Do you really think so? I still can't fully agree, Wāng Shān replied. Yè Xīn sighed softly, knowing that Shān had been trying to see things from her perspective, but still couldn't completely agree. Yè Xīn gently said, Shān, don't feel sorry for me anymore, but could you do a few things for me to prove my point? Shān was very worried that Yè Xīn might still be falling deeper into this situation, and immediately asked, what point do you want to prove? I think everyone is not wrong, and everything you told me is correct. And the things I've experienced, even though they might seem bizarre, are not entirely hallucinations. I don't quite understand. What I mean is, the things I've seen, heard, and felt, others don't see, hear, or feel them. Isn't that hallucination? Do you remember that time I saw the perfect body specimen? That wasn't necessarily a hallucination. Later, in a journal I read in the Moonlight Society records, it was documented that it existed. If you can find a way to read that journal, you'll see that I'm not just talking nonsense. And look at this. Yè Xīn took out a sketch. Look at this student. He is the Xiè Xùn in my hallucination, drawn by Wāng Lán Shān. Wāng Lán Shān is the person I told you about who can see him, even that cold-looking guy. What do you think, is this just a coincidence? Actually, who is Wāng Lán Shān? Up until now, I don't fully understand her, but I have a feeling that she knows a lot and may even be directly involved in the murder case 405. Then, does that mean both you and she can see ghosts? Shān slightly sensed that everything Yè Xīn was saying might not be without reason. It's not exactly seeing ghosts, but perhaps we're just too sensitive. By the way, could you go to the broadcast station and grab a cassette tape for me? I recorded something after the terrifying incident in the station that night. You should listen to see if you hear strange sounds like something trying to claim someone's soul. Yè Xīn has to be hospitalized. Now, I'm temporarily unable to decide who will succeed me. I can't be at ease with graduation. The head of the broadcast station handed Shān a cassette tape with Yè Xīn's voice. She seemed concerned. I've listened to it. It's just Yè Xīn talking to herself, but there aren't any strange sounds like she described. That shows how badly Yè Xīn needed help. I feel guilty because we usually have fun together, but I didn't pay attention to her health. Shān thanked the station chief, then quickly inserted the tape into her portable player. She listened carefully as Yè Xīn's soft voice came through the headphones. There's a female student named Yè Xīn who's gone missing. After that, the sound of the tape running smoothly, with no further noise. About a minute later, faint sounds of a door closing and footsteps were heard. Almost everything else was silent. Later, heavy breathing could be heard, clearly indicating Yè Xīn was terrified. Then, Yè Xīn's trembling voice, I am Yè Xīn. It's about 10 p.m. on May 11th. A few minutes ago, there were strange electrical waves appearing on the equalizers, and sounds coming through the speaker. At first, they were rhythmic, but they got louder. Then the lights in the broadcast station went out, and the electrical waves became chaotic and ear-piercing. I had a terrible headache, and then I fainted for a few seconds. Now it's quiet, but I'm really scared, truly terrified. Thinking of the time when Yè Xīn had to endure such fear alone, Shān felt sad again. Next, Yè Xīn called Zhang Wenguan, and then he came to her. Yè Xīn recorded this part of the conversation to leave a message, showing how much she had struggled that night, and it had grounds for investigation. That was real danger, not just a hallucination. Clearly, even though Yè Xīn was severely tormented, she was still able to handle everything calmly. But since there were no strange sounds in the tape, it only proved that Yè Xīn had hallucinated. Poor Yè Xīn. Shān thought back to Yè Xīn's words in the hospital. I think none of us is wrong, but the things I see, hear, and feel, others can't hear, see, or feel. When Yè Xīn said this, she was so sincere, and her eyes clearly showed that she truly believed in herself. Because Yè Xīn understood that only she believed in herself. Shān rewound the tape and listened again. But the more she listened, the more disappointed she became. Yè Xīn, don't blame me for not believing you. It's clear that I didn't hear anything in these silent segments, even when I turned the volume all the way up. I still didn't hear the strange sounds you described. Just as Shān turned the volume up to the maximum, a weak static sound reached her ears. But it was probably just the machine running or the hiss of the cassette tape. Shān remembered that Yè Xīn had said the strange sound initially had a rhythm, slower than the heartbeat, faster than breathing, almost like footsteps. But then it became like a drunk person stumbling, sometimes strong, sometimes light, disordered. Sometimes it had a rhythm, like footsteps. If these static noises had the characteristics Yè Xīn described, then did that mean the strange sound was real? Shān rewound the tape again and turned the volume up. She listened carefully. Indeed, the static noise began rhythmic, and then it became a bit disordered. But the static was too weak, and Shān wasn't sure if it was the strange sound Yè Xīn had heard. Why wasn't it loud and piercing like Yè Xīn had described? Or maybe Yè Xīn was extremely sensitive, like a sound amplifier, hearing sounds that no one else could. If that were the case, would she be deaf from all the everyday conversations? And if that was the case, then during the singing competition recently, did Yè Xīn really hear Xiè Xùn talking and singing so beautifully? Shān immediately took out the tape of the competition from that day, put it in the machine, and pressed play. The scenes from that day were very noisy, and even when the noise calmed down, someone was still singing. There was nothing unusual. Teacher Zhang Wenguan guessed that the female students jumped from the building because they were influenced by suggestion. Could it be that Shān, wanting to believe Yè Xīn's words, had been hearing these weak static noises? 12 p.m., June 8. Zhang Wenguan listened to the recording of Yè Xīn at the broadcast station more than a dozen times. Eventually, he took off his headphones, waved his hand, and said, "My reasoning still stands. It's clear that you've been influenced by Yè Xīn's strong belief. As for me, I didn't hear anything, let alone the sound of footsteps or the alternating speeds you mentioned." Ouyang Shang, hearing her teacher's blunt reply, huffed and interrupted, "Could it be that you're too stubborn to believe Yè Xīn and have been influenced by your own rigid views, which is why you can't hear anything else?" Zhang Wenguan froze, running his fingers through his smooth black hair, unsure of how to respond. After thinking for a moment, he nodded, "What you said does have some merit. How about this, whether there's an unusual sound or not, let's get a real expert to examine it." Zhang Wenguan led Ouyang Shang to the physics research lab at Jiangjing University of Technology, located near the medical school. When he was pursuing his PhD in neurology, he had chosen to study experimental psychology, and many of his experiments, such as those related to auditory perception, had been carried out there. During his time as a graduate student, Zhang Wenguan had freely explored his interests. He had once designed a project to record the speech of psychiatric patients, hoping to identify common phonetic traits among different patient groups and explore the potential of phonetics to assist in diagnosis. A graduate student from Jiangjing University of Technology, Yen Yen, had helped him with the acoustic analysis, and the two became close friends. It was Yen Yen who introduced Zhang Wenguan to the ghost-catching machine, which had initially been a joke, only for Zhang Wenguan to seriously spend a large sum of money purchasing it. This led Yen Yen to laugh at him for a long time. Yen, who was in his early 30s, was starting to go bald. As he sat in his office listening to the two arguing back and forth, he laughed. Well, let me play it on a real acoustic device and see what happens. Wāng Lán Shān urged, then let's go. Where's your lab? I already told you, we'll listen using a high-end acoustic device. There's no need to go to the lab just yet, Yen said with a grin, pointing to his own ears. Both Zhang Wenguan and Wāng Lán Shān laughed. Yen powered up the mini recorder that Wāng Lán Shān had brought, listened closely a few times, and finally shook his head, saying, "This fancy device of mine is a bit tricky to operate. I think I hear a faint crackling sound, but it doesn't follow any clear pattern. It could be coming from the mini recorder itself." I listened again, and there was nothing. The more I listened, the more blurry it became. Does this mean that even if there is a sound, it's beyond the hearing range of human ears? Zhang Wenguan asked. It's best to let the machine give its opinion, Yen said, standing up to lead his guests to the lab. This is a chance for me to show off a top-tier device. It's a highly functional machine capable of measuring sound frequencies, intensity, and spectra. It can even detect infrasound or ultrasound, with a very wide frequency range and intensity scale. It can separate different sound sources, all computerized, and produce very clear images. If the situation is like we think, if the sound is beyond the range of human hearing, then using this device is like using a surgical knife to kill a chicken. For it, it's just child's play. The voice of Yè Xīn on the cassette tape played, and on the Dream Machine's screen, the sound wave appeared clearly. When the phrase, "a female student named Yè Xīn has gone missing" ended, only the crosshair positioning appeared, with no other sound wave present. Zhang Wenguan let out a sigh and said calmly, "Well then, Wāng Lán Shān, if you remember your promise, I won't have to listen to this cassette at lunch. However, as a teacher, it doesn't feel quite right for the student to treat me to lunch." Earlier, the two had made a bet on this. Wāng Lán Shān, looking disappointed, was about to speak when Yen pointed to a spot on the screen with an English note, lowering his voice, "Don't jump to conclusions so soon. This isn't as simple as it seems." Yen clicked the next command, switched the display settings, and before the three of them appeared two positioning crosshairs, one above and one below, with a sound wave at each mark. Yen confidently said, "As expected." Wāng Lán Shān eagerly asked, "What do you mean, as expected? Can you explain it to us?" Here's the deal. The upper wave is in the ultrasonic range, and the lower wave is in the infrasonic range. In other words, there is indeed sound in this tape, but it's beyond the hearing range of human ears. Zhang Wenguan was shocked. "What does that mean? Are you saying that Yè Xīn heard sounds that ordinary people can't hear?" Yen didn't respond directly. He pointed to the two positioning marks and said, "Look at these two sound waves. Although their frequencies differ greatly, the changes in their intensities follow the same pattern. In other words, these two types of sound follow the same rhythm. If a human ear could hear them, it would be like the rhythm of a heartbeat or footsteps at a steady pace." Wāng Lán Shān exclaimed, "It's just like what Yè Xīn described." Zhang Wenguan asked, Yen, can you clarify? Are you saying that during the silence, there were indeed two types of sounds, one low and one high, present at the same time? And they had the same rhythm, just like the sound of footsteps? Exactly. There's a rhythm, and it seems to get stronger, then slow down again, and then change, so there's no regularity anymore. But the intensity keeps increasing. Oh, it's exactly like what Yè Xīn described. We've cracked the case. Wāng Lán Shān cheered. But unexpectedly, Yen used the mouse to highlight a section of the sound wave, zoomed in, and calmly said, "Don't get too excited just yet. I have two major doubts. First, based on the sine wave form, these two sound waves weren't transmitted through the air. According to my experience reading sound spectra, it seems like they passed through a dense plastic or solid material. It's hard to judge. And you both said that only Yè Xīn was in the broadcast station at that time, so the sound signal should have been received through the air. Even if the source of the sound was outside the door, it was only separated by one door. It shouldn't have this strange sine wave form. You're saying the sound source is very strange? Zhang Wenguan asked. Exactly. And there's another strange point. I may not be an expert, but I know the principle of magnetic recording. It records sound through low-frequency current to change the magnetic field on the recording head, affecting the magnetic distribution of particles on the tape. This is a rather rough way of recording, and it's hard to even capture normal sounds, let alone ultrasonic and infrasonic sounds. Maybe I don't know much, but I've heard it mentioned before. But one thing is almost certain, Yè Xīn really did hear sounds that we ordinary people can't hear, didn't she? Yan pointed at Zhang Wenguan. This is something you should discuss with him. I didn't make a bet on lunch with you. Zhang Wenguan shook his head. I just can't believe it. It's beyond belief. Ouyang Shang said, what's so unbelievable about it? I think you're just too rigid and conservative. What else do we need to do for you to believe it? Ouyang Shang suddenly had an idea. She took out a cassette recording of a karaoke contest and handed it to Yan. Could you please analyze this tape, especially the 2 songs by Zhou Huajian? When they reached the part where Bing Juan sang 2 songs by Zhou Huajian, the screen of the computer showed almost no background noise due to the quiet atmosphere under the stage. The only sound clearly visible was Bing Juan singing. Suddenly, Yan exclaimed, there's definitely something going on. He clicked on a section of the sound wave, zoomed in, and found that besides the accompaniment and Bing Juan singing of, I Don't Want to Be Lonely, there was another sound wave that also went up and down clearly. Yan used the dream machine to analyze this section of sound using the spectrum and looked intently at the printout, constantly amazed. This is really interesting. From my initial observation, this spectrum shows all the characteristic rises and falls of the voice, and it could be considered a singing voice, but it almost has no intensity. In other words, this cassette contains 2 songs. One is the voice of Zhou Huajian, which everyone can hear, but the other one is a song no one can recognize. Except Yè Xīn. Yè Xīn could hear it. Ouyang Shang exclaimed excitedly. The 2 Zhou Huajian songs were finished. Yan said, there are 2 songs that can't be heard. It really feels like we've encountered a ghost. Shang felt a bit lightheaded, and countless thoughts flashed through her mind. It seemed that Yè Xīn wasn't mistaken, she could sense things that others couldn't, and it turned out that what people called hallucinations were actually real feelings. There was no reason for Yè Xīn to need treatment, she could return to live among everyone. But Shang didn't forget an important matter. She smiled and looked at Zhang Wenguan, who was sitting there dazed. Professor Guan, it's already noon, both Yan and I are hungry, why are you still standing there? Can you lend me that key again? What key? When Shang suddenly appeared, Du Jing immediately knew it had something to do with Yè Xīn. What other key? Of course, the key to the document room. Yè Xīn borrowed it from me a while ago. What are you thinking? The security room searched Yè Xīn's bag and took that antique item. They considered it a tool for committing a crime. There's no way they would return it to me. Fortunately, Yè Xīn was kind and didn't expose me, only saying that she found it at the student union. So, I couldn't have it anymore. Of course, I know that. I was just asking to try my luck. Shang looked at Du Jing with a mischievous smile. What are you planning to do, tell me? Shang suddenly pouted, you're acting like you're interrogating me. I should be the one interrogating you. Why have you been going to the security room these days? Are you going there to slander Yè Xīn? Did you report her last time? What? Are you following me? Du Jing jumped up from his chair, nearly dropping his glasses. Who has time to follow you? Shang replied with a sly tone. Come on, don't be shy. Here's the thing, I've been wandering around near the security room these days, trying to sneak in and see if there are any files from the Yue Guangxia. But either there are people there or the door is locked, so I couldn't get in. But I noticed you going in and out a few times. Have you been making some mistake? Playing mahjong for money, or flirting with female students or something? What is the Yue Guangxia file? The file that Yè Xīn was reading in the document room that night. Unfortunately, Yè Xīn didn't finish reading it. Now, why haven't you answered my question? Du Jing nodded, so that's what it is. I'll explain. I've been going to the security room because it's related to Yè Xīn. That day, Yè Xīn was caught in the document room, and the security room confiscated the key and the film roll. They knew she had been there, but she was just taking photos of the files. However, to prove it, they needed to develop the film and see what was captured. Professor Yen, who's in charge of student affairs, also joined with the security team. Professor Yen said, developing the photos would take too much time and money. It's better to let the photography club handle it. The school still sponsors part of their budget. So, this task fell into my hands. Shang jumped up in excitement, so you've seen the photos. Why didn't you tell me earlier? You must have kept a copy, right? Du Jing calmly replied, you guessed it right. I've kept a copy. He quietly opened his drawer, took out a stack of photos, and handed them to Shang. Shang couldn't contain her excitement, lowering her head to look, but her expression changed suddenly. What is this? They're all blurry. Before developing these photos, I had already predicted the result. The reason is simple, Yè Xīn's camera isn't sophisticated enough, its light sensitivity is limited, and her photography skills aren't that high. It's not easy to take good pictures in the dark. Then what should we do? It's a gift from heaven, but still useless. Shang sighed in frustration and immediately took Du Jing's chair to sit down. But there's something even worse. When I handed the results to the security room, they didn't care much, but then they kept pushing me, asking me to develop the photos multiple times, and so I became their servant. Shang listened to Du Jing and immediately came up with an idea. I have an idea. Next time when you go to deliver the photos to them, try to stay a little longer and see if you can spot the Yue Guangxia file in the security room. Even though the incident with Yè Xīn being caught has passed for a while, if they've been careless, they may not have returned that file to the document room yet. What if we still find it there? I'll repeat what I said earlier, I really don't know what you're thinking. If it's still there, of course, we'll find a way to steal it. Otherwise, why would I need you to spy for me? Shang felt relieved inside. Du Jing shook his head like a mechanical shaker in a physics lab. Steal it? How could I do that? I'm a person who respects the law. Then let's not call it stealing. Let's say it in another way. Kong Yiji once said, taking a book is not considered stealing. You're so bold. Yè Xīn has really influenced you. Shang sighed and seemed to zone out for a moment. Yeah, everyone says the same thing. Anyway, it looks like you, Deng Liang Chuan, are like a dough, hard to lift up. I don't want to waste my energy anymore. I'll leave you my pager number, so if you see that file, let me know, okay?